This is the third day of the October 88 7-day retreat. There are many questions again, some of them quite complex. And I have no design or preparation how to go into them, what will come out, we will see together. So can all of us, in looking at these questions, be there with an open, inquiring mind, setting aside, if possible, our cherished ideas and notions and beliefs and opinions, and starting afresh from scratch, if possible. Can we look and listen and talk with an innocent mind? We don't know. We'll see. One person said, you and other people who give talks like you will always mention the beautiful things on a walk, the changing colors of the leaves with the blue sky showing in between, the scent of the earth and leaves and the deer running, and the joy of that, beauty of it. What about gunshots? Why don't you ever talk about coming upon ugliness? How do we see ugliness? Or cruelty, or violence? Because we do talk about it a lot, don't we, in looking into ourselves. How do we look at ugliness or cruelty, violence, anger, pain that comes up in ourselves? But the person wasn't asking about that. It was asking about how do we listen to gunshots? With the sounding of a gun. What are they shooting? That thought comes up, doesn't it? One person who lives around here once told me there's always a season on something here. Right now, it may be wild turkeys. And if one has seen them flying or walking so quietly, maybe a whole family walking from the road into the woods, almost without making any sound, it's an amazing, amazing thing to see. And then to imagine that one of them was shot. That the gun actually, that the bullet actually hit the target. and now one is dead. One may have seen dead birds. Most of the time they are removed by the hunter. Dead, heavy, no longer airborne at any time. So if the mind begins to think about it, wonder about it, what avenues does thought take in thinking about the hunter and the hunted? Why does the hunter hunt? Recently read something of a piece, I don't know whether it was an editorial, an article in a newspaper, written by a man who was very defensive about hunting, which had apparently come under attack. The cruelty of it all. Why not let the deer run? And he was defending it as an ancient heritage of ours. And if one has known people who hunt, there is a real looking forward to this, a wanting to be outdoors this 1 week of the year in the woods with the animals, which very often hunters feel they love. One time, Kyle and I, we were coming back from a trip out west, and we were looking for a motel, and it was an area where the hunting season had just started that evening, and there was not a motel to be gotten, and the restaurants were overcrowded. People were waiting, and just glancing in there were all the tables taken mostly by men in a very great mood of jovialness, friendship, camaraderie, being together, maybe being away from the wives for the week. Yeah, there was a real communion you could sense there. And the people of the motels told us you have to drive maybe 200 miles out of the state. You won't find a place. The feeling of doing something together that has had sanction for thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years of being a valuable or meaningful sport, or maybe some of the hunters do it for sustenance. I doubt whether here in this area it is done this way, whether people dependent on the meat that they shoot, like the Eskimos used to be dependent, utterly dependent. There was no vegetables around other than whatever vegetable matter was found in the stomach of the seal or whale. So there the social responsibility of the head of the family or tribe was to hunt. Bring in the meat so that there could be subsistence and survival and festivity. The hunting for sport is this anything but imagery of oneself as the hunter, the masculine? Maybe there are female hunters too, I haven't seen them. Maybe there are, or maybe they're on the increase. But the image of being the hunter is probably an archetype of our collective unconscious. And what it does to all of us when we are living up to a revered image, an ancient image. the hunted, the animal, the target, one shies away from that word, calling an animal a target, but that's what it is for the hunter. The way in this article that the squirrels were described, you could see there was no feeling, no, other than that this was the target of the season. No feeling for a squirrel. Feeling in terms of living with it or having lived with it. Without any image of oneself as the hunter or this animal as the, I don't know what it's called for the season, the prey. So it is an expression of our living in images of ourselves and the objects of our desire or lust. Long ago, when I was giving talks at a Zen center, one of my favorite texts was a book called a book collected about the life and teachings of a Zen teacher in I believe it was the 9th century or 8th century. It was a very interesting life story. He had come as a young boy, 8 or 9-year-old boy, I don't know the age, I don't know whether it was really known, to a monastery. And the abbot of the monastery had very quickly seen the state of mind of this boy, the potential and the insightfulness. And after the boy wasn't even allowed into the monastery because there would be too much upset among the established monks of giving any kind of favor or attention to a young, uneducated, illiterate boy. So the abbot kept him away from the mainstream of the life of the monastery. But then after having served there for a while, he actually gave the transmission of the teaching, the robe and the bowl, to this boy and sent him off at night. At a time when everybody was asleep, so he would get a head start because the abbot was sure that the monks would take after him if they found out that the robe and the bowl had gone with his boy. Which they did. They pursued him. In some accounts it says they just ran after him, in other accounts it says with clubs and sticks to take his life and get back the robe and the bowl, which was firmly believed was in the wrong hands. And in 15 years of hiding, a lot of the time this young man lived with hunters. So the record goes. And not much is described in his autobiography about it, except that he would cook his vegetables in the pot where they were cooking their meat. And at times he would talk to them about the Dharma, it says, which means talking about the truth of oneself and this wholeness of life. It never said that he was trying to teach them not to hunt or to eat vegetables. And he was protected in the company of the hunters from the pursuing monks. So we can see that what image does to the mind, the image of right and wrong, of somebody being in the wrong and therefore having to be persecuted, the image of being in the right and therefore having the right to persecute or hunt or kill. The person also questioned, in connection with how does one listen to gunshots? What is my social responsibility? The person said that this is a haunting question. What is my responsibility to the world? And it's not just one person who has brought this up. It has come up several times already in this retreat. What is my moral responsibility, is how it was put. What is my moral responsibility toward the world? What am I? And what is the world? We're so heavily conditioned and programmed since time immemorial to think of ourselves as someone separate from this world. And therefore, in the case of some of our upbringing, the obligation, the responsibility to do something for that world, which is, it's not hard to see as great sorrow, violence, cruelty, inequality, injustice, abounding everywhere. But is one separate from that? That is the crucial question to ask. Are one's small-scale relationships with one's companion, the people one works with, one comes in casual contact with, maybe at the store, at the doctor's office, on the bus, or waiting someplace together. Are those relationships with each other on a small scale, are they something separate from what manifests throughout the world? Or is what we call society or the world the manifestation of the way we relate to each other, the manifestation of what goes on in each individual human being? The inner conflicts, the inner division, the constant image making about oneself and others, which leads to such action as hunting and killing. I don't think we would ever kill anyone if there wasn't an image of that person or animal as being something undesirable, to be gotten rid of, a scourge upon mankind, or the enemy, the evil. And in military training camps, I understand, this is what is taught the recruits, to build up strong images of the enemy. And And if that image would ever break down, a soldier would break down in war, which has happened. He couldn't go on, could he? If there was no image, if one saw a human being like oneself. So sometimes people will say to me, we just had a talk about it a couple of weeks ago. What's so great about listening to sounds without the word? I don't see much profundity in it. What we're asking is, can there be listening and looking without the image? See a human being with whom one had difficulty of relating yesterday or a moment ago, freshly, this instant. With the energy of nowness, of not bogged downness by the past. If this is possible, and it is possible, someone says it's possible. If this is possible, then they will not be doing any harm to each other. On the contrary, it's not the contrary. There will be love. There is love. And affection and care. But if we only know about each other and talk about each other in terms of memory and image, there will be antagonism, feeling of separation, maybe banding together with people, or banning, I don't mean it like that, getting together with people who think like we do about that person, gossiping about people. And an ever strengthening of the image of the other person. That is inevitably so. We just think about what he or she did, keep talking about it to ourselves and each other, as a strengthening of the image of that person. And who is that person? The wholeness, the totality of what this person is not in the image. And seeing the person through that image cannot get at what that person is. Who are we? Alone and together. Can one find that out by being together? Finding out about each other if one is really interested, who we are? Living together, talking with each other, and being silent together, working together. With a minimum of memory. Memory operates, but can its dangers be discerned? Sometimes it's important to have some memory of what happened. It all depends. There can be no blank statement about it. But can one be sensitive and discerning when memory becomes a hindrance? In meeting each other, in talking about each other, identifying each other as such and such and so and so. So coming back to the initial question, what is my moral responsibility toward the world? Because moral often reflects the particular culture, time in which we have been raised, and these morals change from period to period, from place to place, even within a certain country, in different segments of the society, there are different morals. Can one examine what morals are very broadly and deeply and see the arbitrariness of most of them? Recognize, find out how conditioned we are to think that the morals with which we have been raised religiously or socially, politically, are arbitrary. To be self-assertive in this country is a tremendous value, at least in certain social classes. When anthropologists started to examine Indian children with IQ tests brought from here, they ran into considerable difficulty testing Zuni or Hopi children with IQ tests, because there it was immoral to stick out individually with anything. Everything was done together. So there was a blockage from the outset to respond to individually put test questions or to excel, which is a great motive in this country, to excel, and therefore test scores reflect that motive to excel, to do well. We don't have to go into detail about this. Everybody knows about it and can look at it deeply for oneself. One can simply ask, what is one's responsibility? Toward the world? What is the world? The world is ourselves in relationship with each other and all of our conditioned responses. This is how the problems of the world are constituted. These are the ingredients of the problems of the world. Our own inner division, our conflicts, our maybe totally unacknowledged and unseen inner violence, or maybe acknowledged in certain aspects of life. Going hunting is all right. Demanding the death penalty is all right. Or going to war, of course, is all right, because what is protected is one's own group. Or so one thinks. It's also false. We're not protected by being a nation state. We're making ourselves and everyone totally vulnerable by clinging to nationality, patriotism, and so forth. So can all of this be examined afresh? Not, oh, I've heard her talk about this so many times. Why doesn't she say something new or different? It is new. It's new for me right now. Whatever I've thought about in the past isn't there. We're looking at it freshly. So in trying to find remedies and solutions for problems out there in the world as we think of it, how are we going to apply those solutions? Who are we to apply them? Is our inner house in order? So that by applying solutions to problems which are not very well understood, are we taking our own inner disorder into this situation? How can that help? Deeply, fundamentally. Or does one see the disorder in oneself as the problem of the world? looking at it, trying to discern it all, to understand it all, not theoretically or philosophically, but directly, experientially, concretely, as it happens, as it manifests when we're talking about someone together, with whom we're having difficulty in relating, or whatever the case may be. To be in touch with the problem of the world in oneself. Not knowing the answer, but looking from moment to moment, learning about it from moment to moment, and seeing how things change all the time. What we think, what we feel, what other people are. If the solid image of another person goes, if it's put aside, in its place there is the direct meeting and looking at each other and whatever one may be engaged in, one realizes the person isn't what I thought he or she was. There are different aspects to us depending on the situation we find ourselves in, depending on the people we're with, whether there is a defensiveness or an aggressiveness toward the person, or a criticalness. Often our face bespeaks our inner attitude. And the other person may read that and react to it. Also, something hasn't been mentioned, we see another person as somebody who this person reminds us of. And again, a very dangerous aspect of memory. The person with whom we're in contact becomes a symbol or a representation of someone else who hurt us or did us harm or was this way or that way. And this is projected upon this person. So, how carefully do we need to be in thinking about each other and looking at each other, being with each other? And one can profess verbally all kind of objectivity, but we give signals to each other which are non-verbal. Body language, it's called, or eye language. I can tell with little children, they don't listen to what you say, they look at your eyes. They take that in, whether it's kindly or threatening, no matter whether the person says, I love you, or one person asked whether a deeply felt, deep reservoir of resentment and a compelling urge to have vengeance, whether it could ever be exhausted. And example cited, anything that appears as unjust, unfair, the tremendous surge of anger and wanting to avenge comes up, wanting to set things right, or the resentment of the person who does things wrong, the anger against him or her. To start out just seeing that this is so, and wondering about it, is so important, isn't it? It shows one isn't just automatically acting out of that, one is beginning to wonder about it. And whether this reservoir can ever be depleted. It starts so early, the build-up of it. Seeing two little children grow up, or grandchildren, one can just observe it so clearly, how an injustice done to them, an unfairness, humiliation. It's stored up. And it will pop out as a vengeful action when the right moment presents itself. To repeat what one was not allowed or punished for doing. Or to get at that person who did it, or at someone else who is an easier target. It happens in the smallest of children already. This build-up, because memory is functioning. And this reservoir from way back begins to come into action when something happens today that is reminiscent of that. What brought on these first hurts and suppression of outlet. Talking about injustice for a moment, because this became the topic of our inquiry. There is injustice all over, isn't there? There is no justice. We have systems of applying justice, but there's such a limited thing. And whether even that is justice can be questioned in many cases, what comes out of a court. Often it's more the cleverness of the lawyer than finding the truth of the case. But there is injustice or inequality everywhere. Can one just look at that unsentimentally, factually? Where we are born, into what family, what inheritance we have, whether we have great talents, gifts, skills, or not. We maybe have been born retarded. What education we have had, what kind of family environment, friendly or distraught. Whether we've grown up in the country, where one can see the trees changing in the fall, or in the canyons of New York City, where there's very little trees, very little sky. In a country which is famine-ridden year after year, poverty-struck for decades, maybe centuries, or one is born into affluence, and often the inner poverty of affluence. Whether one is born good-looking, attractive, or not good-looking and attractive. Already a little child, very attractive, will draw people to him or her. The teachers will like him or her very often just for his looks. And he will have lots of friends, or she. And another one, not attractive, will stand aside. The crowd's moving with the attractive one. Of course, all the history of social injustice to subjugated peoples, races, and so forth. What will bring about justice or fairness or equality? We've tried it with so many ways, so many social theories, so many revolutions have happened. But our inner makeup of wanting to be somebody, wanting to be in power after having been subjugated, thirsting to be in power oneself, this inner makeup always overtakes what the revolution has idealistically tried to establish. Equality, brotherhood, freedom. If the people aren't feeling brotherhood or sisterhood deeply, this love we talked about, and are free from seeing each other through ideas and images, if that doesn't take place, one cannot just establish ideal states or environments from synthetically, as it were, from idea and theory of justice or equality or liberty. What we are made of through centuries and centuries of conditioning will overtake that any time. It has. It's doing it all the time. So the question is, where will one start? With this work of bringing order into disorder. And how can it take place? Will it come from idea about order and then imposing this on what one thinks is the disorder, or will one have to begin to look without any idea? Observe, listen, question, be aware of what streams through this body-mind from moment to moment. And the amazing thing is that it is possible to be aware, at least for moments at a time, without idea, without image, just to be in the presence of the plain fact of anger, or depression, or elation. And can the observation be still? Not wanting to meddle or interfere or change or do, but the openness of not doing, and therefore the energy of looking. If the energy doesn't go into our immediate reflexes of I have to do something, I shouldn't be this way, it should be different, that can be observed too. And then if that quiets down, then there can be the stillness of observation, what takes place in this human being, as in all human beings, in one way or another, one degree or another. And then there will be a deepening of understanding of the world, in oneself. At a moment of clarity, unself-centered clarity, there is no thought or idea about moral responsibility. Then the clarity of seeing, of perceiving, is the response, is the responding. And whatever action flows from it will not create disorder. Not to make ideas out of this, but to always begin freshly where one is. Just this instant. We will end here for today.